Welcome back to the channel. This one will be on the American Conference, and the first one that's going to implying any sort of Louisiana teams, starting with
It's the Wave!
Now, the biggest deal off of Tulane last year and the American as a whole is you had a larger portion of conglomerates that teams were able to get into the primary spotlight for a group of five. As into the later portions of November, you could have had like 4 or 5 teams inside the American that really were realistically fighting for a playoff spot. You had Tulane that ended up making it. You had Army, who was really well early on. You had Memphis going 6-0 to start the season before everything kind of falling apart. You had North Texas only having 2 losses on the season, 1 in the regular season. American Conference Championship, that was North Texas versus Tulane. The winner of that was going to get that first playoff spot for a group of 5. And then there's also South Florida, where things also fell apart after a very strong start. The one thing, at least with all of those teams having in common, is the fact of Memphis loses their coach, Tulane loses their coach, North Texas loses their coach, South Florida loses their coach. All 4 of them going into a Power 4 team. Ryan Silverfield of Memphis going to Arkansas, John Summerall going from Tulane to Florida, Eric Morris, North Texas to Oklahoma State, and Alex Golich going from South Florida to Auburn. Some with a little bit messier exits than others. Some of them, a lot of the turmoil ended up being backloaded on the team for the future, but we'll get into all of these teams, plus a few more that could end up constituting themselves, maybe even another playoff berth. But unlike with the Pac-12, this is completely same conference from last year. No other entries, no other exits. So there's no team that we're having to reintroduce into the conference. And best way to do this is to start off with the reigning conference champ and the team that ended up making the playoff. Unfortunately, bringing a bit of a damper on what you would think for a group of 6 teams on if they'd be able to compete in the playoff era. Making the playoffs, 11-3 on the season. A lot of this getting put down into damp water for the fact of they played Ole Miss in the playoff for the second time in the season, and in both games they only scored 10 points, really not that competitive on either end. You thought Tulane would have maybe the best chance out of any team. Jake Retzlaff comes in through a very unconventional manner, coming in for BYU. If he was still at BYU last year, there was a very strong chance that Bear Bachmeier was to be forced to start late into that process. BYU may have been that Big 12 constituent in the playoff instead of Texas Tech, but then we get on to the Brendan Sorsby stuff, and I'm not doing any of that noise with any sports betting. But back to it, you would hope that something would be able to build and Tulane may have a chance to become a power. And you even got talks of potentially Tulane trying to go all the way up in the Pac-12, which location-wise does not make any sense. But if you're trying to get a conference upgrade from the American, really Tulane had only a few choices, and most of them seem very unrealistic. But yeah, there was the closest chances for Tulane to actually get in a Power 4 conference, in this case Power 5 conference with the Pac-12. Just look back on the season. You had Retzlaff coming in, leading passer, leading rusher. Now he's gone. Then you have Summerall towards the latter portion. All the talks going on to, is he staying, is he going? This might be the best chance for him to go out. All in all, the end story is he goes to Florida. At the point, they tried to go through a few different options. They tried to go see if they could get Oregon's defensive coordinator. They tried to see if they could have gotten Charles Huff out of Southern Miss. But Charles Huff ended up going to Memphis. Honestly, probably is the best job in general in the American. And if you actually get a team to advance further into the Power 4, that probably would be the first option. But what they do is go on to a retread of a coach, had a previous time at Southern Miss, and it was a complete disaster. From 2021 to 2024, 3-9, 7-6, 3-9, and 1-6 in 2024 before getting canned for the aforementioned Charles Huff. Now, you do think for the fact that whenever Huff ends up coming in, he does a good bit better, ends up having a 7-6 season in his one season with the Golden Eagles, but you also have to go through the fact of, I've mentioned it before, he brought in essentially half of the Marshall team of a team that went 11-2 in the Sun Belt, including their quarterback, running back, wide receivers, and once again brings it all with him to Memphis. I'll get to Memphis. Now, let's just look back on the 2 seasons with John Sumrall, because you knew the uncertainty of a new coach coming in off of Willie Fritz taking Tulane to the Cotton Bowl, beating USC in a New Year's Six game in the era of the 14 playoffs still going on. And for the point, you had Michael Pratt, Tyjae Spears, Alex Bowman with the game-winning catch near the buzzer. And you would think, how is a completely new coach going to come in and build off of that success? And what does he show that he's able to do? He takes a 2-star prospect in Darian Mensah, gets him to be the highest rated quarterback prospect coming out of the transfer portal. He ends up going to Duke and ends up leading Duke this season to a conference championship. Yes, it was a 5-loss conference champion, but a conference champion in a Power 4 conference nonetheless. And in this case, Mensah is now at the University of Miami and now the favorite in the ACC to make it back to the playoff after Carson Beck took Miami to a national championship game. So you think that could happen potentially again, especially for the fact that besides a game against Notre Dame, Miami does not have that much of a schedule, especially with how low the ACC has been of late. Will Hall actually comes in from Southern Miss to be the offensive coordinator for Tulane. It does end up bringing a bit of a drop in almost total competency for that offense in general, as points per game go down from 35 a game to 27. But yes, in that case, you don't play Ole Miss 2 years ago whenever you get 35 points a game, and this time you have to play them twice, so the 10 points a game really doctor everything down. But yet, you had a season where 2 of the 3 losses on the year were against Ole Miss. The only other loss was a late October matchup against Texas San Antonio, which is going to be one of the prohibited favorites this year that we'll get into later. But you had Retzlaff come in from BYU, get over 3,000 yards passing, 15 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, leads the team in rushing with over 600, has 2 more rushers with over 500 yards, having 3 receivers go over 500 yards, which was more explosive slightly than the last 2024 season. But after all is said and done, Sumrall actually said in his early interviews with Florida, he said that he was not trying to leave Tulane in a worse spot than they were before he left. And in that case, for the people who left to go with him to join the Gators, only people he actually ended up taking his kicker and his punter, Patrick Durkin and Alec Clark. Yes, both of them being top of the American in special teams honors, but in that case, it is only the kicker and the punter. But at least in this case, he knows while he couldn't be able to fix the struggles himself, let's at least go with people who have been around successful programs. Offensive coordinator, they bring in Russ Callaway. He's worked under Nick Saban. He's worked under Ed Orgeron during the 2019 LSU season, and that's considered one of, if not the best offensive season and season in general in college football. That's someone who's going to be able to help build an offense that really he couldn't get together, as Will Hall, whenever being in Southern Miss. Now, at defensive coordinator, also bringing in a new body, going off of Sumrall's first coaching job in his 2 seasons with Troy. They had double-digit wins. He brings in, at that point, co-defensive coordinator Taylor Polk. Now, this is going to be the first season for him as a true defensive coordinator by himself. He was an assistant coach the past couple seasons with Troy. At least from the point with Sumrall, they were top 15 in sacks, top 10 in scoring defense. A lot of the defensive categories for the Troy Trojans were very high echelon in the Division I in general. So bringing someone at least that knows how to run a team that John Sumrall would approve of is going to be a positive aspect for the Green Wave fan base and to be able to compete in American in general. Now, just like every other, or at least nearly every other Group of 6 program in this transfer portal era, the NIL, they had to deal with a massive set of departures through the transfer portal. a high probability of them going into Power 4 competition for that success that Tulane was able to get last year and that playoff experience. You could say just as much of departures going to Florida with John Summerall, the previous coach in Willie Fritz ended up going into the University of Houston. Javion White, safety, going to Houston, who had second on the team in interceptions and passes defended. And they brought in top guard, who was a 2-year starter and 2-year All-American Conference guard, Shadri Hurst, one that was potentially considered a very valuable Group of 5 draft prospect that could have potentially been coming out this past year, but one more year with Houston likely is going to get a little bit more play on draft buzz once you go into the 2027 draft. But going on to the rest of it, Jaheim Jackson, otherwise known as Joker, ended up leading the team, 4 interceptions, 9 passes defended. He's off to Arkansas. Harvey Dyson led the team in sacks with 8. Edge rusher going to NC State. Tennessee took Jordan Norman, defensive lineman, who had 6 sacks on the team. Santana Hopper going to Colorado, 3rd on the team with 4.5 sacks. Trevon McAlpine going to Kansas, and that's only on defense. Going offensively, Javen Gordon. All the hype was whenever they got Javen Gordon 2 years ago was the fact that they were able to steal him from Duke, get him away from Mensa, and getting him away from the Power 4. And then Gordon 1 year after goes to Tennessee, 3rd on the team with rushing. They had 3 guys who had 500 plus yards. They kept 1, they lost 1, and 1 ran out of eligibility. Then you go from the 4th and 5th on the list. You had Arnold Baines going to Iowa State, and Barry Mobley, who had just under 200 yards. 5 of the top 6 guys are out of there. Then you go the 2 of the top 3 receiving targets and your top tight end. Shad Preston going to Indiana, him joining Kirk Cignetti in the national championship, Indiana Hoosiers. Amari Hayes, who looked like he was going to be the top guy coming into the season, ended up being 3rd on the list in receiving yards, and this time now he's going to Iowa State in that full rebuild prospect after Matt Campbell took a bunch of his team all the way up to Penn State. Justin Reed, tight end, going up to Louisville, led tight ends on the team with 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. That is all the ones going into Power 4 schools. So there is a lot of skill set, a lot of productivity that Will Hall and this team would have to make up for them. Now, despite the fact that they are top 15 in both getting sacks last year and getting interceptions last year, their passing defense actually wasn't very good. Yes, the Ole Miss game is going to skew that a little bit, but for the fact they gave up just about 262 yards per game, which was 11th worst in the country. So you do think that there is a very significant portion of improvement that could come at least in the pass defense, if not getting so much on turnovers. Now, even beyond the ones that end up leaving the transfer portal, they did lose a few key pieces off of their D-line and their back line as well, for the fact of Mo Westmoreland graduated with 3 sacks. Cameron Hamilton also had 3 sacks. Longtime linebacker Sam Howard ended up having 4 sacks and 50 tackles, leading the linebacker group. And Bailey Disbandi ended up leading the team 63 tackles with 5 passes defended. So portions of the entire defense got hit based off of graduation, not just transfer portal. So there is going to be some sort of leadership that's going to have to end up building off of it from the new transfers in and some of the ones still in place. On the D-line, you're bringing back some pretty well experienced depth with Derek Shepard, Amandus Cooley, and Jordan Guidry. But also on the case, you do have to bring in some transfer portal add-ins on the edge for Jared Henderson, who had a couple sacks last season. You had Ed Smith coming in at the D-line from South Alabama. Rashad Sterling coming in from Houston, hoping to get more productivity. But a revamp on that pass defense may have actually been what the team really needed to be able to improve off of last season. 262 yards a game given up in the air. That's awful. Like, they're not short on bodies this year. They bring in Anthony Rogers coming in from Nichols. Isaiah Shrine comes back, who ended up having 35 tackles and 28 solo. They still have Jack Chincho coming back, 80 tackles, leading the team on who's left over. Kevin Adams, 44 tackles. Joshua Moore coming back, 24 tackles. A bunch of the safeties returning. Justin Agu coming from Louisville. Kawan Banks coming in from South Florida. LJ Green coming in from Troy. all of them getting a decent bit of production, a couple hundred portions of snaps in general, to where there is going to be plenty of bodies on this secondary, to where you should not be dealing with an issue of getting tired, not being able to kind of swap out between players. The secondary should be better. There is so many bodies to go through, to where some of these players with experience have to be able to work out for them. But yes, coming into the season, looking at the schedule, the expectations for this team is much lower than last season. It's kind of hard to not admit that, for the simple fact that Summerall's gone. A lot of the heavy experience from skill positions is gone, and there's just so many bodies, especially offensively, that you have to replace. Looking at the season, you do have, just like last year, 2 games early on against Power 4 opponents, at Duke and at Kansas State. Last year, you got a little bit of a layup early on whenever that first game against a Power 4 team ended up being Northwestern, who at best was average, if on the lower portion of the Big Ten. Really, for the most part, outside like the top 4 teams in the Big Ten, there is a very big drop-off once you get past the USCs, the Michigans, Ohio State, Oregons, and Indiana's, of course. But yeah, early on in the schedule, it's going to be a little bit telling on how well this team could progress through the season. There's a very good shot the first month of the season you're going to end up 2-2 with the 2 losses at Duke, at Kansas State. Currently, both of them being double-digit underdogs. Going into what is going to be this conference schedule, where there is so much turnover from the coaching staff, from a lot of the quarterbacks in general. You have Army, Memphis, and Texas San Antonio. Those 3 teams could be potential winners of this conference. Early on, 3 of the toughest matchups. Going on to the back portion of the schedule, though, you get Charlotte, who was terrible last year, considered the worst team in college football this year. Tulsa, Rice, they should be double-digit favorites in nearly all of those. North Texas is losing way more than what Tulane is. They may be close to a double-digit favorite at that point. And then the last portion of the season, the very last game at South Florida. The first 3 games in conference play and that last game against South Florida, those are going to be ones that's going to end up determining how well this season really goes as a whole, and how much momentum Will Hall can build on from what Summerall left over. A lot of people are expecting, instead of getting close to the 10-11 wins that they had last year, it's going to be closer to a 7-8 win season, which is definitely below expectations of what the Green Wave fan base is going to expect, but it also is a bit of a rebuilding process, so we'll have to see how that goes. But instead of going through the rest of the American, this has lasted too long. I'll do a separate video that's going through the rest of the conference, that's going to go through the Memphis, the Army, the Texas San Antonio, South Florida, North Texas, Army, Navy. And the simple fact of any of those other teams have a decent shot to be able to win this conference, North Texas withstanding. Everyone on that team went to Oklahoma State, so I don't really expect too much. But once again, thank you all for watching. More of content coming soon. But yeah, thank you all for watching. I'll see you on the next video, and I'm out.